The morning I got fired started like every other morning, predictable, structured, and quietly suffocating. The office building stood tall against the gray sky, its glass exterior reflecting a city that never really cared about the people inside it. As I stepped through the revolving doors, the familiar scent of burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner hit me. It was strange how a place could feel both like a second home and a cage at the same time. I had given this company 8 years of my life. 8 years of late nights, missed birthdays, canceled plans, and quiet sacrifices no one ever noticed. 8 years of building something that wasn't even mine. But I believed in it. That was my first mistake. My name is Daniel Hayes, and at 32, I was what people like to call successful. Senior operations manager at a fast-growing logistics firm, respected by my team, trusted by clients, and, at least I thought, valued by upper management. I had started at the bottom. No connections, no shortcuts, just long hours and an unhealthy obsession with proving myself. I still remember my first day, sitting at a cramped desk in the corner, watching people walk past me like I was invisible. Back then, I told myself one thing. One day, they'll have no choice but to see me. And eventually, they did, but not in the way I expected. That morning, something felt off. It wasn't obvious. Nothing dramatic. Just small things. People avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when I walked by. Even Sarah from HR, who usually greeted everyone with a forced but consistent smile, barely nodded at me. I tried to ignore it. Offices had moods. Rumors came and went. Maybe there were layoffs coming. Maybe someone messed up. Maybe I was just overthinking. But deep down, there was a quiet unease sitting in my chest, growing heavier with every step. By the time I reached my office, I noticed the email. Subject, meeting request urgent. From Michael Carter, my boss. My stomach tightened. Michael wasn't the type to send urgent emails without context. He preferred control, precision, and, above all, power. Everything he did had a purpose. And whatever this was, didn't feel good. Michael Carter was the kind of man people respected in meetings and cursed in private. Sharp suits, perfect hair, a voice that never needed to rise to command attention. He had built a reputation as a visionary leader, the kind investors loved and employees feared. But I knew him better than most. I had seen the cracks. I had seen the way he took credit for ideas that weren't his, the way he manipulated narratives to make himself look indispensable, the way he quietly pushed out anyone who became too competent, too independent, too threatening. Still, I had convinced myself I was different, that my loyalty meant something, that my results protected me. That was my second mistake. The meeting was scheduled for 9:30. At 9:27, I stood outside the conference room, staring at the frosted glass door. Inside, I could see silhouettes, more than just Michael. That wasn't a good sign. When I walked in, the room felt colder than usual. Michael sat at the head of the table, calm and composed. To his right was Sarah from HR. To his left, someone I didn't expect. Ethan Cole, the new hire, young, ambitious, and recently promoted far too quickly for someone with his experience. He'd meet my eyes. That told me everything. Daniel, Michael said smoothly, gesturing to the empty chair. Please have a seat. I sat down slowly, my senses sharpening, every detail suddenly too clear. The faint hum of the air conditioning, the slight tremor in Sarah's hands, the way Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Something was wrong, very wrong. Michael folded his hands on the table. We'll keep this brief. Of course you will, I thought. He always did. After a thorough internal review, he continued, his tone neutral, almost bored, we've identified several discrepancies in last quarter's operational reports. My heart skipped. What kind of discrepancies? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Michael slid a folder across the table. I opened it, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Numbers, reports, data entries, all of them wrong. Not just wrong, manipulated. Inflated performance metrics, altered expense records, misreported client deliverables. It was fraud, and according to this file, it was mine. That's not possible. I said immediately, my voice sharper than I intended. These are my numbers. Sarah avoided my gaze. Michael tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was a problem he had already solved. Are you saying the reports are incorrect? He asked. I'm saying they've been altered. I replied, my pulse racing. This isn't what I submitted. Ethan shifted again. I noticed. Of course I noticed. Michael leaned back in his chair. Daniel, we've already conducted a full audit. The data trails lead directly to your account. That doesn't make sense, I said. Someone must have... Are you accusing someone? He interrupted, his voice still calm but colder now. I hesitated, because suddenly the room felt like a trap. Every word mattered. Every reaction was being measured. I'm saying, I chose my words carefully, that this needs further investigation. Michael smiled, not a warm smile, not even a polite one. The kind of smile that said this is already over. I'm afraid that won't be necessary, he said. And just like that, I knew. Effective immediately, Sarah said quietly. Finally speaking, your employment with the company is terminated. The words hit harder than I expected, not because I didn't understand them, but because of how easily they were said. Like 8 years meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. For cause, Michael added, that part mattered. For cause meant no severance, no recommendation, a permanent stain on my record. It wasn't just being fired. It was being erased. This is insane, I said, my voice rising despite myself. You can't just... We can, Michael replied calmly. And we have. Silence filled the room. Heavy, suffocating, final. I looked at Ethan, and this time he couldn't look away. There it was. Guilt, fear, and something else. Opportunity. You knew, I said quietly. He swallowed. I just followed instructions. My chest tightened. Whose instructions? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I turned back to Michael, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. Not as a leader, not as a mentor, but as what he really was. A man protecting his power, at any cost. Security escorted me out. Not immediately, not dramatically, but firmly enough to make the message clear. I was no longer part of this place. By 10:15 a.m., it was over. 8 years. Gone. I stood outside the building, the cold air biting against my skin, the city moving around me like nothing had happened. Cars passed. People walked. Life continued. But mine had just been dismantled. I should have felt broken, defeated, destroyed. And for a moment, I did. But then something else took its place. Something quieter. Something sharper. Clarity. Because as I replayed everything in my head, the meeting, the reports, Ethan's reaction, Michael's confidence, I realized something important. This wasn't a mistake. This was a setup. Carefully planned. Precisely executed. And I had just been removed. But Michael Carter had made one critical mistake. He thought I was finished. He forgot something. I wasn't just an employee. I was the one who built half the systems they were now using. I knew every weakness, every hidden flaw, every decision they hoped no one would question. And more importantly, I knew how to fight back. Standing there on the sidewalk, staring up at the building that had just thrown me away, I made a decision. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of something far more dangerous. Purpose. They think they've won, I whispered to myself. A slow, almost invisible smile formed on my face. They have no idea what they just started. The first night after I got fired didn't feel real. It felt like I was watching someone else's life collapse from a distance, like a movie I didn't agree to be part of. My apartment, once a place I barely spent time in, suddenly felt too quiet, too still. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder than it ever had before, each second stretching longer, heavier, like time itself was forcing me to sit with what had just happened. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there in the dark, my laptop open, replaying the same files over and over again. The reports, the altered numbers, the timestamps. Something wasn't adding up, and that was a problem, because I knew my work. I knew every file I had submitted, every report I had signed off on, every late night I spent double-checking data. while the rest of the office went home. I wasn't careless. I wasn't sloppy. And I definitely wasn't stupid, which meant one thing. This wasn't an error. This was intentional. By midnight, the fog of my mind started to clear. Not emotionally. Emotionally, I was still somewhere between anger and disbelief. But logically, everything was starting to connect. Too cleanly. Too perfectly. I opened my backup drive. Most employees trusted the company's servers. I didn't. Not completely. Years ago, after watching a colleague get quietly pushed out over a miscommunication that never sat right with me, I had started keeping copies of everything. Personal backups of major reports, client communications, internal approvals. At the time, it felt paranoid. Now, it felt like survival. File by file, I began comparing. Original reports versus the ones in that folder Michael had handed me, line by line, number by number. And that's when I saw it. Not a big change. Not something obvious. Something subtle, precise, strategic. The numbers weren't just altered. They were reconstructed, tweaked in a way that made them look like natural errors, small inconsistencies that, when viewed individually, seemed harmless, but together painted a picture of deliberate manipulation. Whoever did this wasn't just trying to frame me. They were trying to make it undeniable. My jaw tightened, because there was only a small group of people in the company who had the access and the skill to pull something like this off. And one name stood out more than the others. Ethan. But Ethan alone didn't make sense. He didn't have the authority. He didn't have the confidence. And most importantly, he didn't have the motive. Not on his own, which brought me back to Michael. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as everything started to fall into place. Ethan wasn't the mastermind. He was the tool. Young, ambitious, eager to prove himself, easy to manipulate, easy to control, and if things went wrong, easy to sacrifice. Damn it! I muttered under my breath, because I had seen this pattern before, just not this close. The next morning, I didn't waste time. I wasn't going to sit around feeling sorry for myself. I needed proof, real proof, something that couldn't be dismissed, twisted, or buried under corporate language. And for that, I needed access. There was just one problem. I no longer had it. Or at least, that's what they thought. My access badge had been deactivated. My company email locked. My system credentials revoked. Standard procedure. Clean. Efficient. Final. But systems aren't perfect. People aren't perfect. And companies, they're full of blind spots. 3 years ago, during a major system upgrade, I had helped implement a temporary backend access protocol, a fail-safe designed to prevent data loss during server transitions. It was supposed to be removed after deployment. It wasn't, because no one followed up. No one double-checked. No one thought it mattered, except me. I stared at the login screen for a long moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was a line. Once I crossed it, there was no going back. But then I remembered Michael's voice. For cause. I typed. The system hesitated. A loading icon spun on the screen. For a second, I thought it wouldn't work. And then, access granted. A slow breath escaped my lungs. Still sloppy, I murmured. The company dashboard loaded in front of me, just like it always had. Familiar. Unchanged. Like I had never left. Except this time, I wasn't there to work. I went straight to the internal logs. User activity. File modifications. Access histories. Everything most people never even think about. Everything that leaves a trail. And trails? They don't lie. At first, it looked clean. Too clean. Almost like someone had tried to erase something. But that was a mistake. Because erasing data doesn't remove evidence. It creates gaps. And gaps stand out. I traced the timestamps. Matched them against my original files. Cross-referenced user IDs. And there it was. A pattern. Every Alta report had one thing in common. A secondary access point. Late-night entries. Edits made outside of standard workflow. And every single one of those entries led back to Ethan's credentials. I leaned back slowly, my eyes narrowing. Got you. But then something else caught my attention. Something I hadn't expected. A secondary login. Not Ethan. Not me. Not anyone in operations. Executive access. My pulse quickened because there were only a handful of people in the entire company with that level of clearance. And one of them was Michael. I clicked into the logs. Carefully, methodically, following the trail deeper. The entries weren't obvious. They were buried, obfuscated under system-level overrides. The kind of activity that doesn't show up in standard reports. The kind only someone at the top could hide. But not for me, because I knew where to look. And when I finally pieced it together, I felt something shift inside me. Not shock, not anger. Something colder. Confirmation. Michael hadn't just approved this. He had orchestrated it. The edits weren't random. They were timed. Strategically placed after Ethan's access logs, like layers. Ethan made the visible changes. Michael reinforced them, locked them in, made them irreversible. It was a perfect setup. If anyone looked into it, they'd find Ethan, a reckless young employee trying to manipulate reports. And me, the supervisor who allowed it, negligence at best, complicity at worst. Either way, I was the fall guy. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it settle in. 8 years, and this is how it ended. No, not ended, began, because now I didn't just have suspicion. I had evidence. Not enough to take them down yet, but enough to know I wasn't crazy. Enough to know I wasn't powerless. And most importantly, enough to know they had something to hide. I reopened my eyes, staring at the screen, a slow, deliberate thought forming in my mind. If Michael was willing to go this far, to get rid of me, then there was something bigger at stake. Something worth protecting. Something worth risking everything for. And I was going to find out what it was. Because this wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. This was about understanding the game. And if I was going to win, I needed to stop thinking like an employee. I needed to start thinking like him. A notification popped up in the corner of the screen. Internal memo. Company-wide. I clicked it. We are pleased to announce the promotion of Ethan Cole to acting head of operations, effective immediately. I stared at the screen. Then I laughed. A quiet, disbelieving laugh that echoed in the empty room. Of course, I said under my breath. It all made sense now. Ethan wasn't just a pawn. He was a replacement. You remove the old. You install the new. You control the narrative. Simple, efficient, ruthless. Michael Carter hadn't just fired me. He had erased me and rewritten the story. But stories have a way of unraveling. And I was about to pull the first thread. I leaned forward, my fingers moving quickly across the keyboard as I began copying files, logs, backups, anything that could be used later, not just to defend myself, but to attack. Because now, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. They think I'm out, I said quietly, my voice steady now, a dangerous calm settling in. They think this is over. I paused, looking at Michael's access logs one more time, memorizing them, understanding them. They just handed me a reason to come back. And this time, I wouldn't be walking in as an employee. I'd be walking in as something else, something they would never see coming. The moment I stopped thinking like an employee, everything changed, not instantly, not dramatically, but quietly like a switch flipping somewhere deep inside me. For 8 years, I had played by the rules, followed the chain of command, trusted the system, believed that hard work and loyalty would protect me. They didn't. So now, the rules didn't matter. 3 days after I got fired, my life had already started to look different. Not better, not easier, but sharper. Every decision had purpose. Every move had weight. Even the silence in my apartment felt intentional now, like the calm before something inevitable. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. The files I pulled from the system sat on my laptop like pieces of a puzzle. Logs, reports, access trails, evidence. Not enough to destroy Michael. Not yet, but enough to expose cracks. And cracks? They spread. But information alone wasn't power. Leverage was. And leverage required something more than proof. It required position. which meant I needed to understand one thing. Why was Michael really protecting this? I started digging deeper, not into operations this time, but into the company itself, ownership structure, investor reports, board members, financial statements, things I had never needed to care about before. Because before, I wasn't trying to take the company down. Now, I was thinking about something far more dangerous, taking it over. At first, even the idea sounded insane. A fired employee buying the company that just destroyed him? It felt like something out of a fantasy, something unrealistic, something impossible. But the more I looked, the more it started to make sense. The company wasn't as strong as it looked. From the outside, it was thriving. Rapid growth, new contracts, expanding teams. But internally, it was stretched thin, over-leveraged, dependent on a few key clients, and most importantly, vulnerable. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the financial report on my screen. Interesting, I murmured, because buried in the numbers was something most people would miss. Debt, not small, not manageable, strategic but risky. Michael wasn't just running the company. He was gambling with it. And suddenly, everything clicked. If the company failed, the blame would fall on operations, on mismanagement, on discrepancies, on me. That's why, I whispered, that's why he needed me gone, not just removed, discredited. Because when things started to collapse, he needed someone to point at, a scapegoat. My hands clenched slightly, not in anger this time, but in focus. Okay, I said quietly. You want a game? Then let's play. But I couldn't do this alone. That was the reality. Taking down someone like Michael Carter, or taking control of a company like this, required more than intelligence. It required resources, connections, capital, things I didn't have. At least, not yet. That's when I thought of her. Lena Ross. I hadn't spoken to Lena in almost 2 years. Not because of conflict, but because life had taken us in different directions. She had been one of the sharpest financial analysts in the company. Brilliant, direct, and completely unafraid to challenge authority, which, of course, is why she didn't last. Michael had pushed her out, subtly, strategically, just like he did with anyone who didn't fit his narrative. Back then, I had watched it happen, and I had done nothing. That memory sat heavy in my chest as I stared at her contact. For a moment, I hesitated, because reaching out now, after everything, it felt convenient. But I didn't have the luxury of pride. I pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Daniel. Her voice hadn't changed. Still sharp, still controlled. But there was something else now. Distance. Yeah, I said quietly. It's me. A pause. Not awkward. Measured. I heard, she said. Of course she had. News like mine traveled fast, especially in circles like ours. They fired you. Not a question. A statement. Yeah. Another pause. Longer this time. Let me guess, she said finally. They made it look like your fault. I let out a dry breath. Something like that. A faint scoff came through the line. Michael hasn't changed. There it was. Confirmation. Not that I needed it, but hearing it from someone else made it real in a different way. I need your help, I said. No hesitation this time. No pride. No excuses. Silence. You always hated asking for help, she replied. There was a hint of something in her voice now. Not mockery. Not quite warmth. Something in between. Yeah, I admitted. Well, things change. Another pause. Then, come by my office. Lena's office was nothing like the corporate environment we used to work in. It was smaller, cleaner, more personal. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, sunlight cutting through the space in a way that made everything feel real, alive. She stood by the window when I walked in, arms crossed, observing. You look different, she said. Fire will do that to you. A slight smirk. Or maybe you finally stopped pretending. I didn't respond to that, because part of me knew she wasn't wrong. I placed my laptop on the table, opening the files. I have proof, I said. Not enough to destroy them yet, but enough to show something's wrong. She didn't move immediately, didn't rush, just watched me for a moment longer, like she was trying to decide something. Then she stepped forward. For the next hour, we went through everything: logs, reports, financials, patterns, and the more she saw, the more her expression changed. "This," she said slowly, leaning back, "this is bigger than you." "I know." "No." She shook her head. "You don't." She turned the screen toward me, pointing at a section of the financial report I hadn't focused on. "Look at this." I leaned in, frowned. At first, it looked like normal projections, forecast adjustments. Nothing unusual. But then I saw it. Timing. "These projections," I said slowly, "they don't align with current performance." "Exactly," Lena replied. She crossed her arms again, her gaze sharp now. "They're preparing for something." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of something?" She met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw it. Concern. "The kind," she said quietly, "where people make a lot of money while everything else burns." Silence filled the room, because now this wasn't just about being fired. This wasn't just about revenge. This was something else entirely, something bigger. I exhaled slowly, processing it all. "So, what do we do?" I asked. Lena didn't answer immediately. She walked back to the window, looking out at the city below, thinking, calculating. Then she turned back to me. "We don't expose them." I frowned. "What?" A small, dangerous smile formed on her lips. "We outplay them." My pulse quickened. "How?" She stepped closer, lowered her voice slightly. "We don't take the company down." A pause. "We take it." The words hung in the air. Heavy, impossible, perfect. For a moment, I didn't speak, because this was it. The line, the point of no return. But then I thought about Michael. The setup, the betrayal, the way he erased me without hesitation. And something inside me settled. "Okay," I said, my voice steady now. "Certain. Then let's take it." Lena nodded once, like she had been waiting for that answer. "Good," she said. She walked back to the table, pulling up another file, one I hadn't seen before. "Because if we're going to do this," she looked at me, eyes sharp, focused, "we're going to need a lot more than evidence." A slow tension built in my chest. "What do we need?" She didn't hesitate. "Money." Silence. Because now, the real challenge had just begun. Money changes everything. Not just what you can do, but how people see you. And more importantly, how seriously they take you. The moment Lena said that word, the entire plan shifted from theory to reality. Because strategy without capital is just a fantasy. And what we were planning, it wasn't small. It wasn't safe. It wasn't legal in the way most people understand legality. It was war. "You're serious," I said, staring at her. "I don't joke about things like this," Lena replied calmly. She turned her laptop toward me, pulling up a list of names. Investors, private firms, old contacts, people with money, and more importantly, people who liked risk. "These are the kind of people who don't care about ethics," she said. "They care about opportunity." I scanned the list, my mind racing. "You think they'll back us?" Lena didn't hesitate. "Not us," she corrected. A slight pause. "They'll back the deal." That distinction mattered. A lot. Because this wasn't about sympathy. It wasn't about justice. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about profit. And if we could show them that taking control of the company would make them money, they wouldn't ask too many questions. The next 2 weeks became a blur of meetings, calls, and calculated risks. Every day felt like walking a tightrope with no safety net. One wrong move, and everything would collapse. I started to understand something during that time. Power doesn't come from being right. It comes from being useful. And right now, we were trying to become very, very useful. The first investor meeting was the hardest, not because of the pitch, but because of the doubt. Sitting across from a man worth more than I could even comprehend, I felt the weight of my situation pressing down on me. Fired, discredited, no official standing. "Why should I trust you?" he asked, his voice calm but cutting. It was a fair question. I leaned forward slightly. You shouldn't, I said honestly. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. But you should trust the numbers, I continued, and the opportunity those numbers represent. Lena slid the financial projections across the table. Clean, precise, irrefutable. This company is heading toward instability, she added. Leadership knows it. They're positioning themselves to profit before the fall. The investors studied the documents. Silent, focused. And you think you can take control? He asked after a moment. I held his gaze. I don't think, I said. A slight pause. I know. We didn't secure funding that day, but we secured something more important. Interest. And interest spreads. Over the next few days, things started to move faster. Too fast. Word was getting around. Quietly, carefully, but inevitably. And that was dangerous. Because people like Michael, they don't ignore patterns. Back at the company, things were already starting to shift. Even without being there, I could feel it. Through contacts, through whispers, through the subtle changes in behavior that ripple through an organization when something is wrong. Ethan was struggling. Of course he was. He had been placed into a position he wasn't ready for, expected to maintain systems he didn't fully understand, while carrying the silent pressure of a lie that could destroy him at any moment. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the meeting, his silence, his choice, and the feeling disappeared. 3 weeks and we had our first real breakthrough. A mid-level investment firm showed serious interest, not just curiosity, commitment. It wasn't enough to buy the company outright, but it was a start, a foothold. And footholds turn into leverage. That night, Lena and I sat in her office, the city lights reflecting off the glass around us. We're getting close, she said quietly. Not close enough, I replied. She nodded. Then we push harder. But pushing harder comes at a cost, because the more visible you become, the harder it is to stay hidden. It happened the next morning. My phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at it for a moment before answering. Hello. Silence. For just a second. Then, you should have stayed quiet, Daniel. My entire body went still. I knew that voice. Michael. I was wondering when you call, I said, keeping my tone steady. A soft chuckle came through the line. You're making noise, he said. Unnecessary noise. So are you, I replied. Another pause. Longer this time. You think you're playing a smart game, Michael continued, but you don't understand the level you're stepping into. I leaned back slightly, my grip tightening on the phone. No, I said quietly. A slight pause. I understand it perfectly. Silence. Then, you access the system, he said. Not a question. Of course he knew. You left traces, he added. I smiled faintly. Did I? I replied. Another pause. This time, he wasn't amused. Let me make something very clear, Michael said, his voice colder now. You don't have the power you think you do. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said the one thing he wasn't expecting. I don't need power. I said calmly. A beat. I'm building it. For the first time, he didn't respond immediately, and that told me everything. You're making a mistake, he said finally. Maybe, I replied. A slight pause. But so did you. I ended the call before he could respond. My heart was pounding now, not from fear, from adrenaline, because this was no longer hidden. Michael knew, and that meant one thing. The game had changed. When I told Lena about the call, her reaction wasn't panic. It was focus. Good, she said. I frowned. Good. She nodded. He wouldn't reach out unless he felt threatened. A slow realization settled in, which meant we were getting closer than I thought. But Michael wasn't the kind of man who waited for problems to solve themselves. He acted, and when he did, people got hurt. 2 days later, we found out how far he was willing to go. One of our potential investors backed out, suddenly, without explanation. Then another, and another. The pattern was clear. He's cutting us off, I said. Lena's expression hardened. Not just cutting us off, she replied. A pause. He's warning them. Silence filled the room. because now this wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair. He thinks he can scare us off. Lena stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. Can he? I looked at her, then back at the screen, then at everything we had built so far. All the risk, all the effort, all the truth, and I shook my head. No, because fear? I had already faced that. The day they fired me, the day they erased me. Everything after that was just consequence. I leaned forward, my voice steady again. Then we stopped playing defense. Lena's eyes sharpened. What are you thinking? I met her gaze, a slow, dangerous clarity settling in. If he wants a war, a slight pause, then we make sure he loses everything. And for the first time since this all began, I wasn't just trying to take the company. I was ready to destroy the man who thought he owned it. War doesn't end with the first strike. It ends when one side has nothing left. And Michael Carter? He still had everything. Power, position, control. But what he didn't realize was that everything he had built was already starting to slip through his fingers. The night after our investors started backing out, I didn't sleep, not because I was stressed, but because my mind refused to slow down. Every move Michael made, every connection he cut, every pressure point he applied, it all told me one thing. He was afraid, and fear makes people careless. By morning, I had made a decision. Not safe, not predictable, but necessary. We go public. I told Lena. She froze for a second, not because she disagreed, but because she understood exactly what that meant. No more shadows, I continued. No more quiet deals. We force everything into the open. That's risky, she said. I nodded. So is losing. Silence. Then slowly, she smiled. All right, she said. Let's burn it down. The next 48 hours changed everything. We compiled everything. Every log, every altered file, every executive access record, every hidden financial projection. But we didn't just release it. We controlled the narrative. Because truth alone isn't powerful. Truth, presented at the right moment, is unstoppable. The report went live Monday morning. Anonymous source, verified data, irrefutable patterns. It spread faster than I expected. Industry forums, investor circles, internal company chats. And then the media picked it up. By noon, the company wasn't just a logistics firm anymore. It was a scandal. Inside the company, chaos erupted. Employees confused. Managers panicking. Board members scrambling for answers. And at the center of it all, Michael Carter. I watched it unfold from Lena's office. The city alive outside, while everything inside that company began to collapse. This is it, Lena said quietly. I nodded. Not yet. Because exposing the truth, that was only step one. Step two was taking control. The board called an emergency meeting that same day. They didn't have a choice. When trust breaks at that level, someone has to pay for it. And Michael, he was no longer untouchable. But he wasn't finished. Not even close. That evening, I got another call. This time, I answered immediately. You've gone too far. Michael's voice came through, tight with something I had never heard before. Not anger, desperation. I leaned back in my chair. Did I? I said calmly. You've destroyed the company. I smiled slightly. No, I replied. A pause. You did. Silence. Heavy. Then, what do you want? He asked. And there it was, the shift from control to negotiation. I stood up slowly, walking toward the window. I want what you took from me, I said. And what's that? I looked out at the city. Everything. The next morning, I walked back into the building. The same building I had been escorted out of weeks ago. But this time, no one stopped me. Because this time, I was an employee. The boardroom looked different now. Not physically, but emotionally. The confidence was gone. The control was fractured. The illusion had shattered. Board members sat around the table, their expressions tense, uncertain. And at the head of the table, Michael. But he didn't look the same. For the first time since I had known him, he looked human, tired, cornered. Daniel, one of the board members said as I entered. I nodded slightly, taking my seat. No hesitation, no doubt, because this moment, I had already lived it in my mind 100 times. Let's get straight to the point, another member said. We've reviewed the report. We've seen the data. A pause. Is it real? I leaned forward slightly. Yes. Silence filled the room, because now there was no denying it. We're prepared to remove Michael Carter from his position. The first member said carefully. I didn't react, because that wasn't enough. And I asked. They exchanged glances. Careful, calculated. What exactly are you proposing? I placed the documents on the table. Acquisition terms, investor backing, control structure, everything Lena and I had built. This, I said simply. They opened the files, read, processed, and slowly everything changed. You're serious, one of them said. I met his gaze. I told you, I said quietly. I don't think. A slight pause. I know. The decision didn't take long, because at the end of the day, this wasn't about loyalty. It was about survival. Michael Carter was removed, effective immediately, and the company was mine. The final moment came quietly. No celebration, no applause, just a single conversation. Michael stood in his office, packing the last of his things when I walked in. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at me. You planned all this, he said. Not angry, not bitter, just defeated. No, I replied. A small pause. You did. He let out a slow breath. I underestimated you. I nodded slightly. Yes. Silence. Then he picked up his bag and walked past me, out of the office, out of the company, out of the life he thought he controlled. Weeks later, everything had changed. The company was stabilizing. New leadership, new structure, transparency where there had once been manipulation. Ethan resigned, quietly, without a fight. And me? I sat in the same office Michael once ruled from, but it didn't feel the same, because I wasn't there to control people. I was there to rebuild something that had been broken. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Lena stood by the window again. Was it worth it? She asked. I thought about everything. The betrayal, the fall, the fight, the cost. Then I looked around, at what we had taken back, at what we had changed, and finally, at who I had become. Yes, I said quietly, because this was never just about revenge. It was about something deeper. Respect, truth, power. They fired me unfairly. They tried to erase me. They tried to break me. But in the end, they made one mistake. They forgot who I was. And that mistake cost them everything.